mergem direct la prima prezentare din partea Ștefanei. Sperăm că și cei din online ne văd.
Bună! Eu sunt Ștefana, după cum ați auzit până acum. Prezentarea o voi face în limba engleză, dar m-am gândit să vă dau un pic de detalii despre cum am ajuns eu la jobul pe care l-am acum. Și din un slide o să vă înțelegeți de ce o să vorbesc în limba engleză, pentru că am plecat acum mult timp de acasă. Am făcut liceul la Iași și îmi doream foarte mult să studiez ceva legat de psihologie și criminologie și chiar era în 2013, acum am observat paralela în timp, și nu am găsit nimic pe aproape care mă gândeam eu că o să mi se potrivească, așa că am plecat în Anglia. Am studiat psihologie și criminologie la Royal Holloway, aproape de Londra, și când eram acolo mi-am dat seama că mi-aș dori foarte mult să studiez un master pe forensic psychology, pentru că credeam că sper să ajung psiholog. Când am ajuns acolo mi-am dat seama că de fapt mi-aș dori să devin cercetător și acolo la Universitatea din Portsmouth avem un grup foarte mare de cercetători și de academici care predau și studiază forensic psychology și de aceea am rămas acolo să-mi fac și doctoratul și de atunci am lucrat și ca teaching fellow și ca lecturer și acum am ajuns senior lecturer. Deci, momentan, acolo fac cercetarea pe care o să vă descriu astăzi și predau și la studenții de licență și la studenții de masterat când vine vorba de tot ce ține de forensic psychology. Îmi imaginez că majoritatea nu știți unde este Portsmouth pe hartă, așa că v-am pus acolo un punct roșu. Este chiar la sudul Angliei, foarte aproape de mare. Asta e alt motiv care mi-a plăcut acolo și am rămas acolo de 10 ani de zile. Și da, la sfârșit, dacă aveți orice întrebări, putem să vorbim în română, dar din cauza că am studiat toți termenii în limba engleză, mi-ar fi foarte greu să vorbesc în limba engleză, în primul rând, și în al doilea rând, nu aș ști ce termeni voi îi traduceți și ce termeni nu îi traduceți și ar fi chiar foarte amuzant. Am încercat aseară și mi-am dat seama că are ieși, da, n-ați mai fi atenți la ce zic, că ați râde de termenii mei. Deci, o să o dau pe engleză acum, dar vă rog frumos, da, la sfârșit, dacă aveți orice întrebare, să îmi spuneți. Right, so, most of my research to date is about face recognition, and particularly face recognition in forensic contexts. Today, I'll focus on two different types of face recognition. One of them has to do with eyewitness memory, and particularly eyewitness identification. And the other one is to do with missing or wanted people. So in general, when someone is missing or when the police is looking for a high-profile criminal, they would distribute these appeals and then they would ask the public to recognize that person and call in a sighting. But there's very minimal research on that. So my whole PhD was on the missing persons. But first, I'll focus on the eyewitness identification. So sometimes when a crime takes place, there might be some people around the scene that would become eyewitnesses to this crime, or even the victims sometimes can be in this position. And the way it goes is that the police would then have an investigation around it, then they might have a suspect, but maybe the type of evidence that they have is not very strong, so they're not really sure if that's the person or not. And in that case, they might have to ask the eyewitness or the victim to come and to see a lineup and decide if the suspect that they have is the person who committed the crime or not. So this is what we refer to as eyewitness identification. So someone has seen the crime and then they've seen a lineup and they were asked, is the person that committed the crime in the lineup or not? However, quite some time ago, although more recently there's more and more evidence to this, is that although this is used a lot everywhere in the world, it has big issues. So a lot of the times things go wrong. Some of the first evidence around this came from the Innocence Project, which was founded in 1992 in the US. So what they do is they try to find more evidence or to test DNA evidence in cases where people who went to prison for different crimes claim that they have not committed those crimes. And as you can imagine, everything I'm going to say from now on is an underestimation because they can't test everyone. They can't support everyone because of limited funds. So from what they found, so they have documented as of January 2020 over 350 DNA exonerations. So 350 people that went to prison for crimes they did not commit. And on average, those people spent 14 years in prison. So these are some of the first things that I found out about, forensic evidence, and I started thinking about, okay, can we do anything as researchers to try to minimize this, because it has a really big impact. And there are organizations nowadays that do this in Europe as well. So what they found is that there's different reasons for these people going to prison for crimes they did not commit. Some of these reasons are a little bit harder for me as a researcher to look into. So one of them would be false accusation. If someone has a bad intent, there's not much I can do from my type of research necessarily. Another one is misleading forensic evidence. As I said in the beginning, I studied psychology rather than forensic science. So again, not for my personal interest. And then official misconduct. Again, a lot of things can go wrong, but not necessarily to do with eyewitnesses. So there's two different types of evidence now that really, cause some of these miscarriages of justice. One of them is mistaken eyewitness identification. So you will see that over a third of the cases, someone maybe was a victim or a witness to the crime. They saw someone commit a crime. Then they went to the police station. They saw someone else in the lineup. And then they actually said, yes, I am sure this person committed the crime. And then that person went to prison. That happened in over a third of the cases. Another one is false confessions. And we have a lot of researchers at my university that do a lot of research on false confessions as well. But for the scope of today, I'm going to focus on eyewitness identification. So the main reason why this happens is that the way I've showed you how eyewitness identification takes place in the beginning was a bit of a, not a lie, but a misrepresentation. Because actually what happens is there's someone who committed the crime, then there's a police investigations, and then the suspect that they have might be the guilty suspect. So they maybe caught the right person, and then they put that person in the lineup, and eyewitnesses say, oh yeah, this is the person, I'm sure, maybe, hopefully. However, another case, which might be just as common, because remember, in these cases where they use lineups, the evidence is not very strong, is that the suspect that they have is innocent. But the police still thinks that they are the person who committed the crime. So then they put this person in the lineup, and then the eyewitnesses, for a lot of different reasons, might come to the conclusion that, yes, this person is the person who committed the crime. If it happens that the person they identified is the suspect that they have, then juries are very likely to convict, because me telling you, yes, I know this person, I was there, I've seen it, it sounds like you could trust me because it's based on my memory. Hopefully by the end of today, you'll understand that you probably shouldn't trust these people, but people in the jury and people in the police think that this is still very strong evidence. So there's a lot of research out there to do with eyewitness identification nowadays, and most of the research is focused on three different timelines. So first, things that can happen during the event, so during the crime. Some of the research, for example, is focused on the weapon-focused effect. So a weapon presence often leads to reduced identification accuracy. So this is something that police officers can take into consideration. Was there a weapon-focused, weapon used during the event? Could that affect the eyewitness memory? Something else that can happen is between the crime and the lineup is if people talk to others that were present at the crime. This is something that we refer to as the co-witness discussion or co-witness effects. So sometimes we can incorporate external information into our accounts, even if we've not seen that information at the crime. So for example, if me and Mircea witnessed a crime happening yesterday, and then we have a chat about it, and Mircea says, yes, he definitely had curly blonde hair. How could you not remember it? Definitely. And I trust Mircea, and I trust his memory and his opinion, although I probably shouldn't. So then, when now you ask me to describe that person, I describe the person as having blonde curly hair, although I personally don't remember it. And by the time we get to court, I'll be like, yeah, 100%, I remember this. It's not Mircea telling me. So yeah, there's these things that we have to consider as well. A lot of this was done by Lorraine Hope, who's a professor at our university as well. And then finally, and probably most of the research around it, is to do with eyewitness identification procedures. So there's elements of the construction of these lineups that can affect identification and the accuracy. And this is really scary, but also really good. It's good because it means we can do something to reduce those cases, and we can do something to be better at it. It's also scary because we have the responsibility to try to minimize this. So there's a lot of motivation and quite a lot of funding, if I'm being honest, to support this type of research, to try to do better identification procedures. Most of my research is about this, so for the rest of today, I'm just going to give you like a little bit of a tour of a few of my studies to do with identification procedures. One of the first things that I did in the beginning of my PhD is I was part of a team with my supervisor back then, Ryan Fitzgerald, and one of my best friends, Eva Rubinova. And we decided that there's a lot of research out there saying we should have sequential lineups rather than simultaneous, and we should have video rather than photo, and we should have this rather than this. But no one has actually looked at, okay, but what do people do in real life when they run an eyewitness identification procedure? Because if we say everyone should use video rather than photo, but everyone already uses video rather than photo, we're just wasting our resources on this type of research. I'm exaggerating, of course, nobody does that. But anyway, that's how we decided that we're going to do a policy search. So what we did is we looked for legislation, criminal codes, and case laws in 54 countries. And then we had 53 variables that we coded in all of these different guidelines around the world. All of the results, if you're interested in this, are online. We'll share the slides, I think, afterwards as well. So there's a lot of information out there if you are interested in testing anything to do with lineups that would justify why you would do it, because there are comparisons around the world. And I'll show you some examples of how I did that now. This is a bit of a map of all of the countries that we coded. I think you see it better there. So you'll see that there is quite a big variety of the location in the world as well. A big disclaimer is the fact that guidelines do not mean practice. So if you do have any idea of what's happening in practice here or anywhere else in the world for that matter, please do get in touch with me. We're trying now to do more interviews with people that actually do this in practice rather than just look at guidelines, because we know guidelines are hard to follow. So what recommendations are in these guidelines? A lot, I've already said. There's 53 variables we coded. So there is a lot out there. I wouldn't have had time today, and I could teach a full course on this, which I do back home in Portsmouth. But I decided to just pick a couple that I have most personal research experience with. One of them is lineup size. So what do we think about? Lineup size is the minimum number of lineup members that they recommend we have to have in a lineup in order for the police to deem that lineup as fair. As I said, as I've shown in this previous slide, 59% of the guidelines said something about lineup size, which means people who run these lineups in real life think that lineup size is important. However, when we coded all of the countries, you see that the minimum recommended lineup size widely differs from where you are in the world. So when I realized this, for example, here in Romania, they recommend a suspect and a minimum of 4 fillers, so people that we know are innocent in the lineups. In England, where I'm from, we do 9. Well, no, I'm from Romania, where I teach. We do 9. So I just became very interested in, okay, where are these differences coming from? Why is everyone doing something else? Hypothetically speaking, if the suspect is innocent and they're in a 6-member lineup and someone chooses just because they think they have to choose someone, the chance of them being picked is 17%. However, if we increase the lineup size to 9 members, the chance decreases to 11%. So a lot of the literature around it was saying we should use larger lineups because if you think about it, from a numerical perspective at least, the chance of me identifying an innocent suspect is a little bit lower the larger the lineup. However, the more I looked at the empirical studies, every single person found a different result. So what I decided to do is a meta-analysis in which we had 14 experiments from 12 studies published between 1985 and 2020. This added up to over 17,000 participants, which sounds like a lot in a meta-analysis, but it really isn't a lot for the type of research that we have. But this is everything that was out there when I performed the meta-analysis. There's different constructions, lineup constructions, methodologies that were included, but I only focused on lineup size for the scope of today. This is published, so if you're interested in anything else, feel free to have a look. But the lineup size ranged between 2 and 12, and most of the experiments included a comparison of 6 members in the lineup. What we found is exactly what we were thinking beforehand, that suspect identifications decreased for both target present and target absent. So the more people you add to the lineup, the more you're protecting the innocent suspect, but it also means that the more the guilty suspects might also not be identified in the lineup. So there's a lot more work to be done here. As you can see, people have a lot of opinions in the guidelines, which is based on almost no research to date. So at the moment, I'm going to skip this next slide. At the moment, I just received some funding this year to do a big lineup size study, but using eye tracking. So we want to see how many faces do we actually look at if we have 9 members in the lineup. Do we still just look at 6 members? Because that would justify, of course, the lack of effect as well. Well, the very small effect size as well. Another thing that a lot of the lineups were talking about was the lineup medium. So as I said before, there's different ways of conducting these lineups. Sometimes we can conduct the lineups live. This is quite similar to what you would usually see in movies. So all of the people in the lineup are present in front of you, most of the time behind a one-way mirror, so you can see them, but they can't see you. There's also video lineups, which is what we use in the UK, in which you see everyone in the lineup in a video where they just look at the camera for 5 seconds, then they look to the side for 3 seconds, then they look to another side for 3 seconds, and then they look at the camera again. So then you see all of these videos one at a time, or there's a photo lineup as well. So now, by a show of hands, who thinks that if you witnessed a crime and you were giving the following options, who would pick to see a live lineup? Okay, who would do video lineup? Who would do photo lineup? Okay, usually with my students I have a lot more time and then we go and discuss why live and what's better and what's not better. Some of the things that a lot of people mention is the fact that I get to see the full body, I get to see how they move, you know, I get to compare their heights, this and that. And I think it's, this is quite in line with what we found in the guidelines as well. So you will see that the countries in red have a live preference. So they say that, you know, most of the time lineups should be run as live lineups. The one in blue, which is just the England and Wales, we recommend video lineups and we use video lineups. But that's also because they have a lot of resources to have a big database of videos. And the countries in green have no preference. However, what that means is the fact that they tend to do what they've always done, they just haven't put it in guidelines. So when we talk with people in the US and Canada, they tend to do a lot of photo lineups. When we talk to people in South Africa, they tend to only accept live lineups. My supervisor then went and studied this, exactly what I did with you as a little game. We wanted to see, okay, he wanted to see, so what do people prefer in general? And we found exactly what you showed today as well. Most people would say that live lineup is the best, followed by video, and almost no people said photo. So he came up with this hypothesis called the live superiority hypothesis, which is the belief that live presentation of lineup members yields better eyewitness identification outcomes. We were very conflicted by this after we did the guidelines, because from a memory perspective, this can also be yeah, okay, from a memory perspective, you have more cues, but we have to think of eyewitness identification in the social context as well. People tend to choose less in live lineups because of the pressure as well. And you have to think about the fact that the person live in front of you, if you're picking someone who is the wrong suspect, might go to prison. So we did a lot of studies on this, this is one of the publications that came out of it, in which we tested over 1,000 participants during open days. So all of the participants were unsuspected witnesses, which is very important in this area. So it's not like I told you, all of you, you have to remember this face, I'll test you later. The way we did it is exactly like today. I was presenting our university to the new prospective students. Someone would interrupt the lecture and they would say, oh, I forgot my pen, this is my pen, I'm gonna take it. Then they left. And then at the end of the lecture, I said, actually, this is part of an experiment. That pen was totally mine and they stole the pen. Could you please take part in our experiment to see if you could find the guilty suspect? However, none of our experiments supported this live superiority hypothesis. So we did not find a significant difference between live video and photo. So there's a lot more to study here as well. I'm not going to keep going on and on about everything that we could do when it comes to lineups, but just to say, to end kind of with this, is the fact that a lot of our research is then used in these white paper reforms. So sometimes we can't change the guidelines just yet, hopefully in the future, when I become a professor. That's like my goal. But people in our area do tend to write these kind of like more evidence-based guidelines that we publish, and then people in different parts of the world, particularly in the US, tend to listen to this a little bit more. There is, though, one main reason why the research, although growing by the minute, has a lot of limitations that are not included in these white paper reforms. And one of them is this stimuli crisis. So in order to do these studies, we need lineups, we need faces, we need mock crimes. We definitely need a lot of resources. You can imagine how long it took us to test over 1,000 participants after they've all encountered someone in person. I can tell you, because I was there a lot of Saturdays during open days. It took us forever. So yeah, one of the main reasons that the field is yet to, be better, I would say, is the fact that we just don't have a lot of adequate stimuli for it. So what we decided to do is to put together a stimuli database, which included a mock crime video and standardized images to be used in lineups for a lot of faces. So people can just use this. I'm mainly presenting this just in case any of you want to do any type of research with faces where you might need faces, or if you're maybe interested in doing lineup studies after this, hopefully. So I'm very happy to say, after many years in the making, this was accepted on Monday, so it's going to be out soon. And I am the main person in the team who's sharing the lineup. So you have my emails on the slides. If you just send me an email, so I can send you the lineup. What it has, not the lineup, the database. What it has is 231 identities in total. You'll see based on the slide that we have variety in ages, sex, and self-identified race. However, we also decided to see, can these faces be used together in experiments or not? And it was also a way for us to give you some more data rather than just the photos. So we also tested 1,584 undergraduate students with 6 crime videos and 6 lineups each. So what you will get if you are interested in this, or if you do any research in relation to this, is for each identity you will get a video in which they commit a mock crime. You will get a standardized photo that you can use in the lineups, because all of the photos are taken identically with the same everything. This was a lot of work as well. And then based on our experiment, you will also get all of the data, which means that for each person in the lineup, so let's say this person is number 182, you'll get how many participants were tested with this identity, how many of them correctly identified them from a lineup, how many of them incorrectly identified them from a lineup, discriminability and response bias, which you're going to hear a lot more in a minute, and then all of the plausible, based on all of this data, different plausible fillers that you can use in lineups. So basically, if you want to do a lineup study tomorrow, and most of the times I spent the first year of my PhD trying to find stimuli. You don't have to. Just drop me an email. I'll send you all of this. You can have a lineup by Monday morning. So yeah, this is just to, if you, yeah, I'm very proud of this. So I'm just trying to convince everyone to do some studies to use it, basically. Right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about my other area of research, still to do with faces. But this is what I did all my PhD on. And what I'm still doing research on, although, yeah, maybe like 50-50. So the main question of my PhD was, what information should we include in missing persons appeals in order for them to be better used? And it was, this is something that we refer to as prospective person memory. It's not something that has a lot of research to it so far. It's probably like 5 of us in the entire world. So it's a very niche area. Which means 2 things. One is if you have an idea, you can definitely study it because most likely it's not been studied before. But 2, there's not a lot of research to base these new ideas on. So there's some positives and some negatives to it, but I felt very passionately about it. So an example of some missing persons appeals, these are from England. That one with pink is something that the Missing People charity, who is the main distributor of missing persons appeals, shares. This one with blue is something that a police station created and started distributing when someone went missing. So you will see that there's big differences between them. Again, here, if I had more time, I would start a conversation about it. But since we don't, I'll just tell you. That one has a lot less information, but it has multiple images, which supposedly is better. Also, the fact that it has less information tends to attract people's attention a bit more, which is very important because the information only matters if you look at it and read it and encode it, and then that fits your later encounter with the missing person. This one, however, has a lot of written information, which people tend to think is very important. So if by some miracle you actually saw this printed in Mega Image and then you stopped and you looked at it and you encoded all of this information, from a memory perspective, this should help you spot the missing person. So all of this, everything I've said about this slide, was a lot of my ideas when I started my PhD. However, there's not a lot of research, so I didn't know if it was just me having theories and hypotheses about it or if actually this will be proven to be right. And as I give this presentation in a lot of different conferences, I always tend to showcase what it actually looks like in that country. So you will see here that if you go to the National Police website, I assume it is, there is a lot of missing persons appeals that you can search for. You can search based on their name, based on the location. I just put Cluj for this. And then when you open, and some of them have a little bit more written information, like the ones I've shown you before, but that's not very consistent, which means that most of the time people who have to deal with these cases decide how much information they should put or not, which I mean, it's good because it's probably based on previous experience, but it's also not ideal if we want to find better ways of creating these appeals and recognizing the people. So what I did in my PhD is I really thought about the difference between familiar and unfamiliar faces, because if these people, the missing people, were familiar to you, you would recognize them very quickly. And if you saw them on the street tomorrow, you would recognize them very quickly again, and you would remember that they are missing just because it's a familiar memory cue. However, with unfamiliar faces, it's very difficult for you to even recognize them based on one printed appeal, regardless of what information it has. And this comes from what I thought at the time, 3 main reasons. One of them is the perceptual experience. So we just tend to have a lot more experience with the familiar faces. So the people that were here on last Wednesday, well, a different building, whatever, I can recognize some of you because this is the second time I've seen you. And if I keep seeing you by 3 weeks, in 3 weeks' time, I'll even recognize you even better. So every time I see you, I see how you look in a different day. However, with unfamiliar faces, we only have one image or multiple images depending on the appeal. So my first study that I did during my PhD is we looked at the number of images, but also the amount of information that is in these images. So we compared 3 low variability images, so still 3 images, but all of them taken in the same day. So the amount of variability was not very high, with 3 high variability images, so 3 images taken in very different days. And what we found was that people were better at discriminating between this person and someone who looked like them when we used the high variability images. So this is very much in line with what I was thinking is happening when we get more familiar with the face. And we also found that including names in missing persons appeal are better. Some of the current projects that we have now with some of my students is, again, we use eye tracking to see, is it the actual information in the image, or is it just the fact that having more different information in the image changes the way you look at these photos? So yeah, we're still collecting data for this. Another one was the contextual information. So as I've shown you before, different appeals have different types of written information next to them. And there was no study out there to see, okay, but does this actually help if someone reads all of this information? So we did a register report in which we collected almost 400 participants, which is a lie, because actually we collected 300 participants online, in person, and then COVID happened, and then we had to do it online. So we have almost 700 participants. And we compared no information, so there was no written information, just their name and the photos, with relevant information. So for example, we would say, very similar to what these missing persons appeals that I showed you were, he might be wearing a red jacket, and then they were encountered wearing a red jacket. So this is something that should help your memory to find that person. Or irrelevant information in which we say he might be wearing red trousers, but the person was not wearing red trousers. And we didn't find any significant effects, and we also didn't find any significant equivalence. So yeah, quite something, that study. Something else that I think is very important is repeated exposure. But this brings me to date. So we haven't looked at this yet. And then there's, of course, everything else that we should look at. There's a lot more things that we can test to try to improve the use of these missing persons appeals. So yeah, it's a work in progress. I've included my email here as well. But before I take any questions, I wanted to say that I am looking for a student who wants to do a fully funded PhD with me. The funding includes all of the money for the fees for the university, as well as a monthly allowance, which is quite good. It provides 3.5 years funding, which includes a placement. And if you want to apply, just drop me an email and I'll let you know how to do that. The deadline for the application is 17th of January. I'm happy to give feedback on an application if you're very interested in it. But yeah, this is everything I had to say. I know it's quite a lot of information. I just really wanted to, show you a lot of different research areas that I do. So hopefully you will find some sort of interest in some of it. But yeah, if you have any questions.
Thank you.